You're listening to the Play Therapy Podcast with Dr. Brenna Hicks, your source for centered and focused play therapy coaching.
Hi, I'm Dr. Brenna Hicks, the Kid Counselor. This is the Play Therapy Podcast where you get a masterclass in child-centered play therapy and practical support and application for your work with children and their families. In today's episode, I am answering a question from Carley in Oregon. And Carley works with kids 3 to 18 in a rural town in a community mental health agency. And she's asking about managing germs in the playroom. Oh my gosh. So tricky to navigate sometimes. So Carley, thank you so much for your question. And thank you for helping all of us to process this in a helpful way. So I'm going to read parts of her email and then I'll kind of unpack what my thoughts are and some tricks that I've learned along the way, tools of the trade, if you will. Okay, so Carley asks, I have a client who obsessively licks and spits on his fingers during play, which is very difficult to witness as he enjoys playing Uno or Candyland. I'm really not sure how to handle this in a child-centered way. After setting the bottle of hand sanitizer on the table next to him, he used it twice and I didn't notice him lick or spit his fingers after that. However, I also have kids who have very runny noses. And as we're in the thick of allergy season right now, I'm seeing more and more kids with runny noses. So I've silently offered tissues, set a bottle of hand sanitizer next to them, or have said, there's a bottle of hand sanitizer or a box of tissues here if you need them. This is something I've been thinking about recently, and I worry about stepping out of the therapist role and into mom role at these moments of wanting to minimize the spread of germs. All right. So Carley, thank you so much. This is a really helpful question. I don't think I've ever addressed handling germs in the playroom before in an episode. So this was actually a really unique topic to bring up. All right, so let's start with the licking and spitting because I think these are actually related but very distinct issues. So I'm going to talk about the runny noses in a second, but let's address the specific client that licks and spits when he's playing. All right, I would categorize this differently because a child who is licking or spitting, that is a choice that the child is making. That is a behavior. Whereas a runny nose is not a choice, not a behavior. It's just a state. Right? Child has a runny nose versus child is choosing to lick or spit. So I would actually kind of perceive these differently and then therefore handle them differently. So with a child who is licking or spitting and then therefore playing cards, which means his DNA is now all over the cards, right? This is something that we can address as a behavioral issue and therefore provide a limit. And let's pop quiz. We have 3 questions that we ask ourselves for setting a limit, and there are 3 unwritten rules about limits in the playroom, right? So if we recognize I cannot allow this behavior to continue and still unconditionally accept the child. And then in this case, I think there's certainly a connection to allowing the behavior to continue. And even if I can still accept the child, I'm going to be worried about all the kids that come in after him. So it's going to influence the whole rest of my day with kids, right? So even if we cannot have an issue with that child directly, it's going to impact your work with other clients after the fact. So if that warrants a limit for you, then you would absolutely set a limit on that behavior, just like you would set a limit on sand is not for taking out of the tray, or the mirror is not for throwing Hot Wheels at because it can break, right? So in that scenario, you would go through the ACT process. So you're going to reflect the feeling, acknowledge what is going on with the child. I suspect possibly, I don't know this for sure, I have not been in your sessions, Carley, but I suspect maybe he has watched adults as they're flipping through papers or money or something, probably sees them lick their fingers so that they can grab one piece of paper at a time or $1 bill at a time. So I'm wondering if he's mimicking something that he has seen where he's trying to keep his fingers a little bit moist so that they're better able to sort through the cards. That's a guess. I don't really know for sure. But regardless of the reason why the child's doing it, you can just reflect that the child is wanting to do that, even if we don't understand why. So when we acknowledge the feeling, we might say, you're licking your fingers before you touch the cards. So We don't really know why. We don't know if he wants to, he likes to, he feels he needs to. There's motive behind it. We don't know, but we can definitely just acknowledge what we see happening. So, oh, you're choosing to lick your fingers and then touch the cards. Okay, so that would be the acknowledgement. Then we move into the neutral limit. But when you lick your fingers, that gets germs on the cards. Notice that it's neutral. You could also say, but your hands aren't for spitting on, or your hands aren't for licking when you're playing cards. You could also set it that way. But notice that you want it to be completely neutral. So there's no judgment or frustration in it. It's just your fingers are not for licking while you're playing cards, or your fingers are not for licking in the playroom. You could even do it broader, because then maybe he stops doing it while he's playing cards, but then he does it while he's playing with the blocks. And then you're right back to square one. So you could even go broader. But either way, you're going to acknowledge what he's doing. You're going to then set the neutral limit, and then you're going to give a choice. So your choices actually can go in a lot of different directions here. But you might say, you can choose to go wash your hands and continue to play with cards, or you can choose to put the cards up for the rest of the day. Which do you choose? Okay, that would be one option. Another option is you can choose to not play with cards, or you can choose to not lick your fingers and choose to play with cards. Which do you choose? There's all different options that you could throw in there, because the goal is not that he can't play with cards. It's that he can't lick his hands and then play with cards. And I would absolutely set a limit on that behavior, because what you mentioned where you set the bottle of hand sanitizer on the table next to him, that was a subtle implication of, I want you to clean your hands, which is no longer child-centered. So I understand you didn't necessarily want to bring it up directly. So you were trying to go with the subtlety there. And many of us do that. We think that if we just hint at something quietly, that it's not directive, but it is. So don't get caught in that trap. We just need to address it if it requires a limit. And in this case, I would absolutely set a limit on that kind of behavior. It's the same thing with kids picking their nose in session. It's not necessarily a fun limit to have to set, but it's necessary, because we have to be considerate of other kids coming into the playroom afterwards. All right, so now let's move on to the runny nose situation. So again, this is different because the child has no control over this. Also, you need to differentiate. I mean, all of us do. I'm not just speaking to you, Carley. We need to differentiate between runny nose because of sickness and runny nose because of allergies. These are two very different things. Runny nose because of allergies, there's no contagion factor. Runny nose because of sickness could infect a whole bunch of people. So that's why we have a very specific sick policy at the center. And if you believe that a child is sick, you need to send them home and not have a play session. Allergies are a little bit of a different story. They just have runny noses, but they're not necessarily going to infect anyone. Okay, so here's what I typically do with that kind of scenario. You just acknowledge what you see happening. Very similarly to how we acknowledged that he was licking his fingers when he was playing cards. We would say, I see you have a pretty runny nose today. It has to just be stated out loud before anything else can be done about it, because it needs to be addressed so that the child is aware that you have noticed and that they're aware that their nose is in fact running. Sometimes they're completely oblivious to it. So, wow, your nose is super runny today. Or, oh my goodness, you have a runny nose. So we just state it as a neutral fact, right? And then you can either use an I wonder statement and see what happens, what the child chooses to do with an I wonder statement. So once you acknowledge that the child's nose is running, you could say, I wonder if you would like a tissue. Now, they can ignore you. They can say yes, they can say no. But you've at least wondered if they are interested in wiping their nose. If they choose not to and or they ignore you, so you have a 66% chance of their nose not being wiped and you're right back to square one. So if the child does not acknowledge your wonder statement and or just says, no, I don't want a tissue, then I would probably give a choice. The only way a choice works in that scenario is if the why is coupled with it. So I would probably say, your nose is runny and there's lots of kids that play in here and other kids use the same toys that you're using, and we need to make sure that they stay clean. So you can choose to wipe your nose on a tissue, or you can choose to wipe your nose on a paper towel. Which do you choose? Now notice that the choice becomes, how are you going to wipe your nose, not whether or not you want to wipe your nose. But the why has to be coupled there, because they need to understand that it's to keep the toys clean and that other kids are going to be using the toys, and we don't want there to be germs on the toys. Kids understand cleanliness. Kids understand toys not having germs. That's something that at a very young age they learn. So as long as the why is coupled with that, you can use the choice and give them some power and control over how they choose to wipe their nose. Okay, so those are my 2 thoughts to answer those specific questions, Carley. And then let me share one final thing. Microban, which I don't know if this is internationally available to all of my international listeners, but in the States, Microban is the most amazing thing. It is an aerosol spray. It is 24 hours of germ killing. So when I've had a kid with a runny nose or that licks their fingers or that spits or whatever, and I just feel like I want to just kind of disinfect anything that the child was kind of around, I can walk in and in like 1 minute, I can have everything sprayed off. So Microban is like a play therapist's dream trick. So get yourself some Microban spray, and then you can just kind of spray everything down. It dries quickly, and that can be in your turnaround time in between clients. So that's one ninja trick. The second is Clorox wipes become your favorite thing for all hard types of toys, even like Uno cards, for example. You can just Clorox wipe anything really quickly. It dries fast. It doesn't ruin anything. Obviously not on like leather or, soft stuff, but anything that's hard or coated, you can use a Clorox wipe on. So that's a really helpful tool. And then finally, if something really needs to be like deep cleaned or truly disinfected. So if a kid uses a whistle or a flute or what's the other thing that they always use? Kazoos. If they, put their mouth on anything, and or if they've had a runny nose or they've been picking their nose or they sneezed on stuff or whatever. I mean, if it truly needs to be cleaned, we set those toys aside in a dirty toy bin, and they are actually removed from the playroom for the rest of that day, or at least until we can get to cleaning them. So don't feel bad about taking a toy out. If it is truly needing to be cleaned and like just a simple Clorox wipe isn't going to cut it, just remove it from the playroom, keep it in your dirty toy bin that's reserved to be cleaned later. And then as soon as you can deep clean it, then you can put it back in the playroom. And that should eliminate the bulk of your concerns about germs in the playroom. So, Carley, thank you so much for the email. And I hope that's helpful to all of us because, gosh, working with kids is messy business sometimes. And we have to know the tricks and tips to kind of get us through that. So I deeply appreciate the email, Carley. Thank you to each and every one of you for reaching out and email me. I'm so grateful that you all are so invested and so engaged. And I'm trying to get through these questions as fast as I can, but it really does mean a lot to me that you all are so committed to CCPT and you're trying to make sure that you're handling things in the most effective ways. It makes me smile every time I hear from one of y'all. So speaking of, if you would like to reach out to me, I'd love to hear from you. Brenna at thekidcounselor.com. And if you would like deeper, greater, better, more discussions, then you definitely need to join the CCPT Collective. We have had so many people join in the last couple of weeks. I'm so excited for the way that this is growing. It's our online community specifically for child-centered play therapists. So if you're interested in that, please check it out, ccptcollective.com. We'd love to have you in there. And we have all kinds of veterans. We have graduates of the program that are CCPT rock stars. And then we have people still in school that, are really, really new. So the whole gamut, something for everybody. It's such a fun time. And the Zoom calls are so much fun. We laugh and oh gosh, we have a blast. So if you want to check that out, want a community around you, we'd love to have you, ccptcollective.com. All right, y'all. Love you guys. Thanks so much for everything that you do. Thanks for your work with kids. Thanks for hanging out with me. We'll talk again soon. Bye.
Thank you for listening to the Play Therapy Podcast with Dr. Brenna Hicks. For more episodes and resources, please go to www.playtherapypodcast.com.